Good morning. Today's reading is from James 1, 9 through 12. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because, like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flowers fall, its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. Good to see everyone. It's good to see people here this morning, and also it's good to just know that many of you are tuning in on the live stream. So it's always great to know that we are part of a worshiping body, whether we're home or whether we're here in one another's presence in Forest Hills. So I'm Pastor Michael, and most of you know that I celebrated a birthday on Friday, and I want to thank you for your birthday wishes. I want to thank you for your phone calls, your texts, your wishes on social media. I really felt honored by you all. And I want to doubly thank parents who got their children kind of together so that they could send me birthday greetings by video. I know that will be shown on today's Miss Roseann Sunday School, but Roseann allowed me to see those wonderful faces and wishes on Friday when I celebrated my birthday. And we actually had two children who sang happy birthday. And one sang with her beautiful voice on the guitar. So thank you for participating in that. It gave me great joy and gladness, and I just felt like my cup was filled to overflowing. Now I want to give you an update on something. You know that I have been away for 2 weeks on study leave for my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation. So here's what is going on, and it's really good news. I was able to get to the next milestone, right? I spent some good time studying, researching, having conversations with colleagues and advisors, and I got a chance to get in front of a key advisor, and she was able to green light me to the next level. So, here we are moving along in this. And the doctoral dissertation is designed for this purpose to edify the church, to strengthen the church. So, here's what my topic is. My topic will be on the book of Revelation, because I want to preach Revelation here at Ascension next year. It's no easy book, and it's going to take a lot of preparation. But as I study it, what I have come to conclude is, here you have the last recorded words of Jesus in the Bible, the last recorded words, and it's his last recorded message to the church and to the world. And it was given to disciple the church. It was given to be a resource for discipleship. Now that's unbelievable to many people who get very intimidated by the symbolism and the language, and maybe even get bewildered. But when you understand some key things, it really helps you to read it and participate in its message and to grow. So that is my desire as I move along with this. So I still need your prayers, and check in on me regarding this. Now, this is actually part of my sermon introduction to James on financial trials. Why? Because let me tell you what the book of Revelation does for our discipleship. It prepares the church, the first century church, but also it has prepared the church through the ages, and will prepare the church up to the time of Jesus' return. Will prepare the church to disciple and worship Christ. And doing that in the midst of what? Trials. trials, tribulation. In the midst of a society or societies that Christians find themselves in where governments are not necessarily friendly to the gospel. And we know overseas in China, Russia, Iran, places like that, that's very much the case. It's very pronounced. But also there are a lot of temptations for the church that are addressed. The church, we as the people of God who are followers of Jesus, are tempted to compromise the teaching of Christ, but also doctrinally, but also in terms of our lifestyle. We're tempted to compromise in the midst of what they were tempted to compromise on, giving in to the culture, to the point where you are giving in because you don't want to face personal loss, financial loss. It's easy to forget God in the midst of a consumer-driven culture. And so that's the Babylon, element of Revelation. And so this speaks to us today because we, no matter where you are in the socioeconomic spectrum that James refers to here, you and I face financial trials. We're tempted to compromise our worship of God. Okay? So that's what James is holding out to us in this first chapter, to help us, to equip us to overcome in our difficulty and our trials. So here's the promise. We just read this in verse 12. It's an offer that when we understand why God puts trials in our lives, and we ask for wisdom and perseverance, the ability to push on and be resilient, He gives that to us. He gives us sturdy lives, steadfast lives. And verse 12 holds out the promise of a crown of real and unfading glory if our lives are fueled by Christ's love. That's James 1. And so how does this teaching on financial trials fit into this bigger picture, this bigger narrative that James is teaching us about trials? Well, here's the deal. This is a case study. We just read this. It's a case study for people who are advantaged and those who are less advantaged. Okay? And since trials are faith testers, we learned, they are also faith builders. And so here's a test. It's a test case. And it has to do with our finances. So he's addressing those who are lowly, those who are rich, the disadvantaged, and those who are advantaged. And both of these situations present trials to us, tests of faith. So let's see what the gospel says to us as the gospel addresses each of these groups. So we're going to look at the gospel, what it says to the disadvantaged first, and then what the gospel says to the advantaged, and then finally what the gospel says to all of us. Okay? So let's take a look at the first one, what the gospel says to the disadvantaged. And we're looking primarily at verse 9. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation. It's odd, right? Because to say you should boast if you are experiencing some kind of economic disadvantage or setback, to say you should boast in that, you should know that you are exalted by God, it seems so counterintuitive, right? But it's just as odd as when James says earlier, consider it joy when you face trials of many kinds. It's the same theme, that this is a trial because each of us face disadvantage at different points in our lives. And right now some are experiencing more than others, but we do have setbacks. But God is speaking to us saying, let that trial finish my work in your life. Cooperate. Let it finish its work, my work. So boast in your exaltation. Now, James has just spoken about the crucial role that wisdom plays in us overcoming trials. So this is the wisdom. Okay? We could search through Scripture to find wisdom on various topics and trials that we're going through, but he's giving us wisdom, kind of plug-and-play wisdom here. So here's the example of a person experiencing trial by disadvantage. And I want to disabuse you of the notion that even if you are not considering yourself socioeconomically, near poverty, please don't think this doesn't apply to you. So I think that both of these apply to us at different points in our lives, at different periods of the year, in terms of our attitude. So there's something here for each of us. And what James is saying is, take a look at this exaltation that you have. You, by grace, have been exalted into God's presence. You have a new identity. You have a new purpose, a new meaning. Okay? And you are part of a new family, the family of God. And you have a new king, Christ the King. And based on all those great gospel realities, those things that you've heard earlier today in our service and you continue to hear, you have a high position. So, boast, brag. You belong to a master who purchased you, a king who left his throne to advantage the disadvantaged. Now, of course, many of you have experienced real setback during this time. And the people in James's original audience had experienced that. There are many people who are near poverty level, and there had been a famine in the land. And so this really resonates with his audience, a great part of his audience. And I want to, in terms of application, talk to you about the opposite of bragging and boasting in your exaltation. In other words, thinking horribly about yourself and your situation, right? Because that's very common, that when we are facing some kind of disadvantage or setback or threat financially, we can easily feel like just collapsing, right? Just withdrawing, feeling sorry for ourselves, maybe feeling jealous or resentful toward others. Saying, I missed chances in my life and I can never go back. Life has passed me by. The gospel message here is, believe this good news and know that you have something of enduring, stable power in your life. And so allow the gospel to eliminate excuses and really low self-esteem when it comes to these sets of circumstances. Wrong career choices, or things that you had no control over, like you were furloughed during this time, or you lost your job. The good news says to you, and I want to encourage you this way, believe this gospel and also know that there is a God who, it says in Psalm 34, is close to the brokenhearted. He is close to those who are crushed in spirit. And so weariness and fatigue is something that really we're all experiencing to some degree right now. And we've had our share of feeling bruised and battered. But it's interesting, this word lowly that we just read, let the lowly person exalt in their position. I was reading this morning where Jesus says, "Come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." I said, that's interesting. It's just my devotional. I'm having a time of worship with God. What is this word, lowly? And then I just did some research real quick. It's the same exact word. You see, if there's anyone that understands what it means to be disadvantaged, it's Jesus, the man of sorrow, the man of grief, who came for you. Now, I want you to feel the comfort of the gospel here. But the gospel also brings discomfort. And it is also disruptive. And it does that with this next category that we can often find ourselves in, we may relate to primarily. It's what the gospel says to the advantaged. After James, by the way, the brother of Jesus, says, let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, says, let the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass, its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. I want to caution you here to not think that just because you're not part of the 1%, top 1%, that you're not considered rich. In terms of assets, in terms of resources, advantages, the fact that you're living in the Western Hemisphere, in New York City, in these neighborhoods, in Queens, means that you are wealthier financially than much of the world. So, and you're also wealthier than much of the world through the history of the world since Jesus' ascension to heaven. So, by and large, we are advantaged in different ways. And so we have the ability to enjoy resources and to pursue good things, right? Like we have this codified, right, in the Declaration of Independence, that we have a right, right, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to pursue wealth building, to pursue careers, to pursue health, which will enable us to enjoy wealth. We have so many opportunities, and yet James says that as you're pursuing opportunities, realize that your pursuit and my pursuit has a shelf life. It has an expiration date. It's called your death. It could even be before we die. Those things could crumble, fall to nothing, the things that we're pursuing. And so, there was a commercial years ago by Chase Bank, and they were selling their card, but they were also selling kind of a lifestyle which would make them more money. And I hope I don't get sued. Anyway, I'm going to continue because it's a good illustration. So remember what they said? And here's the tagline: chase what matters. Chase what matters. It's almost like, like what matters most? I have the passport, I have a credit card, which will enable me to pursue happiness on my terms as I'm defining happiness for myself. And James says that that's foolish. James says that that's not wisdom. And that the wise person understands something that he knew and many others knew who lived back in that day. And I think live today in Israel. They know that this Judean sun in the wilderness, right, in the desert, was hot. It was like, it delivered scorching heat. And a flower could just, spring up early in the morning. And what they observed was the hot desert wind combined with the Judean sun could scorch that flower, blast that flower to nothingness, just in a matter of hours. And James says this is a good way to look at our pursuits. Nothing is guaranteed in life apart from a life well lived in God's grace, pursuing God. So here's the deal, right? Prosperity, to the extent that we're experiencing prosperity, right, is very difficult for us. It's easy to pray when you're facing a certain degree of lack of plenty or maybe poverty, right? Because what else? Who else will you go to or turn to? Even the atheists are challenged in this way, right? But You see, here's the thing. In prosperity, it's the most difficult thing to turn to God. English writer John Flavel wrote in the 17th century something that many writers have written since then. Looking at spiritual dangers, right? He has a whole long list of spiritual dangers. He says the number one spiritual danger is prosperity. It's when we do well and we feel self-made, self-righteous, like we're carving out a life for ourselves, we're becoming successful, we're maybe hitting our goals, maybe most of them, if not all, and we feel very, very good about ourselves. And we neglect God. We forget God. And so this is the theme of James, that in wisdom, you're putting God front and center. And that's what trials are designed to do, to let us know that God owns it all. And He owns you, and He owns me. He owns your children. He owns your friend. He owns the world and all that is in it. And this is why God would say to the people of Israel, as they were about to go into this land of promise, He would say in Deuteronomy 8, take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping His commandments and His rules and His statutes, which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten, now get this, and when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold and your Bitcoin is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. A little bit further down, he says, beware, beware, danger, danger. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and my might, my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth. And don't forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, because you will perish. That's what James is saying. It's easy to believe that our success is because we've made it ourselves. I told you a story a few years ago about a local owner of a business, and my wife had been in there a bunch of times, developed a rapport with this person, and this person's business was booming. And I'm going to call him Matt. And just out of the blue, for no reason, right? Roseann didn't bring up the subject or anything. He said, Rob, look around you. You see all this? See all this? This is me. God didn't make this. God didn't create this business. I did it. This is me. Now, I appreciated his honesty. But what he said and blurted out was what we often, by default, believe. And so, I think the saying is true. Some people are so poor, all they have is money. Friends, in our pursuits, let's call on God and ask Him for wisdom. Let Him disturb our comfort. Allow those trials, those uncertainties to bring us to Him, but also allow your prosperity to point the way to a greater prosperity. Because the key to understanding life is this: the spiritually wealthy know and boast in a humility where there's true spiritual wealth, where true spiritual wealth is found. And to be rich is not what you have in your bank account, but what you have in your heart. And I'm going to expand that, because I found this. I thought it was clever. What you have in your heart by God's grace, and what you have in heaven. Something which moth and rust cannot destroy. Okay, so we're comforted by this. We're disturbed. Now, what does the gospel say to everyone, regardless of where they are at? And I think that this, James could have, because this is a test case, he wants us to implement wisdom thinking about our finances, our socioeconomic situation. And by the way, when you saw the title of this sermon, you probably thought, oh, your financial trials. You know, this is probably a sermon about how to trust God and get more money, right? To make more and make ends meet. Well, you see, that's never a problem for God, okay? For God to give you more resources, He can withhold them, but He can give you more resources. That's not what James is concerned about. And I think we just saw what his biggest concern is. That you and I take our lessons and our hardships and our prosperity, and we do something productive with them. And we bring them both to God. Now, my daughter is doing her own dissertation for her bachelor's degree at a school in London. And we're talking about her dissertation topic, and riffing off the problem of evil, right, because she's a philosophy student, she's doing a study on how the African American church, the black church, was sustained during the time of slavery, sustained spiritually. And we had some wonderful conversations about that. And it reminded me of 12 Years a Slave, which I got a chance to finally see the other day. And you know, it's terrible, right, how the slave owners would use Jesus' own words and mangle them, right, and twist them in order to justify slavery. And this one particular guy was so unspeakably evil that he would have a church service for the slaves and use Jesus' words as a weapon against them. And if you know the story, it's a period drama, it's based on the memoir of a slave, a real person, Solomon Northup, and he was free, he was born free in upstate New York, and he had, you know, of course there were still problems being a free black man. He was still very limited, and there was, you know, a lot of racism, but he was free, and he had more advantages than those who were in the South, okay? He was kidnapped by these con men, and he was a slave for 12 years on a plantation in Louisiana. And, you know, after one of his friends dies in the field, and they bury this person, you see this scene around the grave, and all these friends are singing, "Roll, Jordan, roll," you know, this famous Negro spiritual. And I'm looking at all them singing, I'm not seeing Solomon sing. And I'm thinking, oh no, I wonder the state of his heart right now. He's not singing. You know, if anyone had a right, quote unquote, right to be bitter and angry at God, it would be Solomon, right? Because he faced a certain amount of prosperity and freedom, and then the adversity comes. And then I wondered, how could he even believe in the song that he's singing, that the Christian God loves him, that the Christian God is not out to get him? Maybe you've thought that before because of adversity. But then he starts singing, and then something beautiful rises up in his, you just see it visibly upon his face, his countenance. And then I found this wonderful quote from the book and not the movie. And here it is. This puts you into his thinking, and I think it really addresses, for people like my daughter who are interested in this topic, and for us, what sustained the African American community during this time to help them continue to persevere in believing the gospel despite so much evidence that maybe the Christian God was out to get them, because certainly the slave owners used the Bible to justify slavery. At such times, Solomon says, the heart of man turns instinctively toward his Maker. In prosperity and whenever there is nothing to injure or make him afraid, he remembers him not and is ready to defy him, but place him in the midst of dangers. Cut him off from human aid. Let the grave open before him. Then it is in the time of his tribulation that the scoffer and the unbelieving man turns to God for help, feeling there is no other hope or refuge or safety, save in his protecting arm. How do we know that God loves us? despite our trials, financial or otherwise. Well, what he understood, Solomon, is what Christians are growing in understanding more and more. And I hope this is true of you. And if you're not a Christian, if you're in the audience and you're checking out Christianity, and this is an engaging, intriguing subject, I would ask for you to consider this. Solomon knew that the trial that he was experiencing was redeemed by a God who went on trial for him. The biggest trial in the history of the world, where this innocent, spotless God leaves the glories of heaven and the advantages and the prerogatives of that. And he comes down and he becomes poor to identify with us in order to make us wealthy, spiritually wealthy, because we were in poverty, in our sin, in our rebellion. No human being is exempt from the grip of the slavery called sin. And it's a worse slavery than any human slavery. And so we are saved by the trial of Jesus. In other words, by the cross of Christ. And it's through the suffering, sacrificial love of Christ, my friend, that we are saved from God's righteous judgment and anger and our own sin. And you see, it's at the cross where we see the one who remained perfectly steadfast under trial. This is a promise for us, but I want you to see that this is about Jesus. Jesus is the man who remained steadfast under trial. He never broke. And when he has stood the test, Jesus stood the test, and he received the crown of a king, which God now promises to those who love him. Friends, we are saved by the cross. And that means none of us are exempt from suffering and from trial. But understand what the cross does for us. The cross saves us by this trial. And so our many crosses and many trials can be redeemed, can be used by God for this wonderful purpose of creating us to become more like his Son. And the promise is held out to each of us in the future, that we will receive the victor's crown. The crown of victory that Jesus has purchased for us. That, my friends, reminds us that every rich person knows, every spiritually rich person knows that the ground is level for all at the cross. The ground is level for all at the cross. Those who were formerly disadvantaged or advantaged. And what this means further is at the throne of Christ. Whether we're rich, poor, black, white, brown, yellow, as people refer to our colors, we are the human race. No matter what country we come from, we all at the throne of Jesus have equal access to eternity in a city that will never fade. An inheritance is our pursuit, a pursuit that we go for each and every day in faith. And it's a beautiful promise, but I hope that you've experienced the nearness of Jesus today in our service of worship, but also that that's true in your life. And realize that this is the thing that makes us abundantly wealthy more than anything else. It gives perspective to our lives more than